Ladies and gentlemen, the blood splatter is about to increase, because the moment you've been waiting for has finally arrived. Guts, the Black Swordsman, has finally attained the Berserker armor. And guess what? It's pretty fucking metal. In the grand tradition of the main characters of an anime or manga series getting a power-up, such as Goku getting Super Saiyan, or even Naruto gaining the power of the nine-tailed fox, Guts has attained his very own super-powered form, which is the Berserker armor, which is not only an incredibly badass set of black armor which takes the form of a skeleton, but it actually conforms to his inner demon dog beast, taking the form of a giant, howling demon from hell. Not only that, but it actually acts as an Iron Maiden, piercing his body from all different angles, healing every single wounds, and completely erasing his pain, which transforms Guts into a veritable killing machine. And that's saying a lot, considering that his main set of skills mostly came from fucking shit up. This is the episode of Berserk that I have been waiting for years. This was that moment where when I read it in the manga series, I was begging for a Berserk anime adaptation, and this week's episode absolutely did it justice on every single front. I especially loved the final shot of this episode where Guts finally gets this magical super enhancing armor, and at first he just completely wastes these apostles with such extreme prejudice and so much blood exploding in your face that you just can't help but get excited. But it's that final moment where he starts to transform, when the actual Berserker armor basically syncs with his inner soul, his inner darkness, and starts to transform into this wolf-like helmet. And they basically take the image directly from the manga, add some color to it, and it's the perfect way to end this week's episode. The good thing is, this week's episode is also incredibly simple. Basically, we have the brand new Band of the Hawk, which consists of all of these apostles, which are covered in armor. They're led by Zod and Grunbeld, and they've arrived at Flora's place, and they are just going to burn it right the fuck to the ground. Luckily for her, the Skull Knight is around, and he is going to do everything in his power to fight for her, but basically Flora has accepted her fate, and essentially does die in this episode, in a very sad scene where she is being covered in flames and basically just burned alive, right in front of Shirke, who is just freaking the hell out in this episode. To Shirke, Flora is in many ways kind of like her mother or even her grandmother, and you get to really feel her sadness in this episode as she completely loses composure, she can't use any of her magic, and she's freaking out because there's all of these really disgusting monsters which are trying to kill all of them. And with Guts and Skull Knight fighting against them, it leads to a lot of great imagery. Let me go ahead and get my one complaint out of the way. There's one thing that I don't like about this episode, and that's that every single time that the apostles transform into their monster forms, it's just like a weird, quick transition. They just go from, like, instantaneous human to just basically in the blink of an eye transforming into a monster. And I always imagined that in the manga version they would go through a much more violent-looking transformation, kind of like something that you would see, like, in a werewolf movie. But that doesn't happen at all. But it still is good that this episode looks really nice with the monster designs and the fact that they're all just creepy as hell looking. And Guts has a lot of really powerful opponents he's going up against. When they actually arrive at Flora's and it's on fire, he immediately starts attacking. It's actually amazing that Guts is able to fight at all, considering that he has these massive wounds on his body. He was just throwing down with Slan, the whore princess of the Uterine Sea, in last week's episode, and his entire chest was just completely ripped to shreds. While his physical wounds have healed, it's his astral form that is actually having some issues and can actually pop up and create even bigger problems later, even going as far as to actually open up his physical wounds. But he says, fuck that, I'm gonna jump in and just start fighting anyway. And he immediately fights against this one armored apostle who gets the Dragon Slayer stuck in his shoulder. This dude just pulls it out, transforms into a big monster, jumps up into the air, and then Skull Knight just comes in and slices and dices him to hell. It's really damn great, and before any of the other apostles can start to fight Guts, that's when Zod makes his big appearance, and this is the moment where Guts realizes, oh shit, these guys are working for Griffith, they're part of this brand new Band of the Hawk, And that's when Grunbeld walks in. Grunbeld is going to be Guts' opponent in this episode, and in the next one when he dons the Berserker armor for the very first time. And in the first part of this battle, Grunbeld just beats the ever-living shit out of Guts. And he hasn't even transformed into his apostle form. He's this towering dragon knight with a massive explosive cannon shield and a giant hammer, which is so powerful that just the blows from it, even when Guts actually blocks them, manages to crack his ribs and put him right into the dirt. There's a lot of scenes of him just flying around and getting his ass handed to him in this episode, and it's amazing he lasted as long as he did. But Zod is also craving a battle, and luckily for him, the Skull Knight is there, and he goes through another transformation sequence, transforming into his massive beastly apostle form, and both him and the Skull Knight start to throw down. Again, I don't really like the transition from his human form to his monster form, but I still like the fact that they still had that scene where that one apostle, the pig guy who was wearing all the armor, got his head completely crushed by Zod. Of course, it was a lot more violent in the actual manga version, but still, it was satisfying as hell, and I still think that the CG animation looks really cool with the apostles, because again, they're otherworldly creatures which are supposed to look really weird when they're moving around. So let's get to what was really important about this episode, though. The buildup of the Berserker armor, which at the beginning of the episode, they show it off a little bit. Flora is mentioning its superpowers and how it seems to have some sort of relation to the Skull Knight. It's very apparent that the Skull Knight used this armor at one point, as the actual armor itself reflects what the person's inner soul looks like, and considering that he takes the form of a skeleton and the original form looked like that, well, you can put the pieces of the puzzle together for yourself. It isn't until later in the episode when Flora tells Shirke to get Guts this armor fast, because he is struggling, and it's hidden away in this alcove which is below her place, and Guts is able to get down there with a little bit of help from his friends. He dons the armor when suddenly this massive apostle comes in and tries to eat him alive. That's when this apostle starts to walk outside, claiming that he tried to eat him, but something hurts, when you get to see all of these slashes suddenly appear all over his body until it explodes into this just giant chasm of meat and flesh and ridiculousness. And there he is, standing in front of the fire, being covered by a sea of rain. We have Guts in the Berserker armor for the very first time. I especially love that they kept that one scene with the Apostle who jumps down and bites down directly on Guts all the way down to his abdomen, but then he just slices right through its body, again just causing this massive sea of blood to explode all over the place. This episode was metal as hell. It was awesome. So, what's the rundown on this week's episode of Berserk? I'm just glad that we are finally here. This is what I have been waiting for. The Berserker armor is one of the coolest elements of the Berserk series, and it takes a long time actually getting to it, especially even in the manga version, but it totally pays off in the actual visual style of it. It's one of the coolest things that I've ever seen, period, and to finally see it, like, animated is honestly kind of surreal, and the fact that it was actually done justice to the manga version, that's an even bigger accomplishment. I'm glad that they are able to make this thing work. That being said, this episode again was not perfect. There are some moments where the CG animation looks a little strange. I don't like the transitions with some of the transformations, but for the most part, this was an action-packed, monster battling episode of epicness, and I truly loved it from beginning to end. I cannot wait to see what else they're going to do with this Berserker armor. I hope they go above and beyond with this battle and give us something that we've never seen from the Berserk series yet. This is sort of, to me, the turning point of Berserk. The moment where Guts discovers this brand new power, which is going to be incredibly instrumental in his battle against the Apostles. Of course, the Berserker armor itself is a double-edged sword, as not only does it increase your ability and erases all of your pain, but it also completely destroys your body at the same time. This is a big problem for Guts, as he's one of those fighters that when he goes in, he goes hardcore 100% full-on rage, and he's not even going to have to worry about even hurting his body. But by doing this, he is just increasing his chances of death that much more. And of course, there are a few other little surprises about the Berserker armor, which I don't want to give away for people who do not read the manga version. I would love to hear the reactions of people who do not actually read the manga and are just watching this in anime form, because I thought this episode was awesome, and it totally captured all of the epicness of the manga version. In fact, I think my favorite thing about it was just seeing it in color. Just the look of everything, just the fiery background, Guts standing on the bodies of apostles, just erupting into anger and transforming into that distinctive Berserker armor-looking state, just sold me on this episode. And that's definitely a reason to watch this week's episode of Berserk. It was fantastic. So, even though I did have some minor complaints about this episode, I think it lived up to the hype. I think it's damn near on par with the actual manga version. I'm glad that they kept some of my favorite scenes, especially the introduction of the Berserker armor, which I think is one of the coolest introductions to any big major transformation or like big power-up. This was a great episode. Check it out, Berserk fans. So clearly, I was really loving this episode a lot. It's one of my favorite from the series. I think it did perfect justice to the manga version, and I want to hear from you guys. Were you excited about this episode as I was? Did you love seeing the Berserker armor for the very first time? Did you have a favorite scene from this episode, whether it be something action-oriented or story-related? What do you hope to see from the rest of this Berserk adaptation? Please tell me your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you guys so much for watching this review. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for all things Berserk anime related. Please leave me a comment telling me what you thought about this week's episode. If you have any questions for me, if there's anything you want to talk about, I'm always down for a good conversation, especially about this week's episode. And of course, if you liked this video, make sure to hit the like button and share it with all of your friends. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. I'll see you guys next time. And as always, stay dandy, baby.